when we speak about metabolic health, we talk about a scale of like where are you on that scale of metabolic health? Good metabolic health being basically that your body is very receptive to insulin, and poor metabolic health being your body not being very receptive to insulin. That is mainly driven by lifestyle conditions, obviously genetics as well, like partly, but very much of epigenetics. So things that have basically been accumulated by decisions in your own health. 92% of the adult population is considered metabolically unhealthy. Health is wealth is actually true, and the highest currency that you really like have in life.
There are a lot of generalizations about diets. Like there's keto, glucose, it's good or bad, processed foods, fasting. But now with these devices, you can track specifically what each body needs.
You are the CEO of your own health. Like you have the tools that you need, and you then are requesting like what services you want from the health care industry. And they are then basically helping you with that care, and you are sort of like building that path yourself.
Welcome to Reinventing Capitalism, a space where tech, entrepreneurship, and impact intersect. I'm your host, Claudia Thomas. Today, I have the honor of interviewing Anttoni, founder of Veri, a health tech company monitoring glucose levels to address the current global metabolic health crisis. And now he is the director of partnerships at Oura. Anttoni founded Veri in 2020 and has grown the company to more than 50,000 users prior to the acquisition. Oura Health, a company that sells a smart ring that tracks your sleep data, acquired Veri at the end of 2024. Oura has sold more than 2.5 million rings and makes more than $500 million in annual revenues. Oura recently closed a Series D round where they raised $200 million, bringing the company's valuation to an impressive $5.2 billion. Join us to explore how Anttoni is revolutionizing the health prevention and treatment processes of our future with the impact of data and AI. Hi, Anttoni. How are you?
Hey Claudia, I'm great. Thanks for inviting me. Excited to be here.
Super happy to have you. Where are you calling from today? Where are you?
I'm at the Aura offices in Helsinki. We have a beautiful office here in Helsinki. Um, Very nice on the sort of like the main quad or street of the of Helsinki. So it's beautiful.
You have a lot of light in your face, so it seems like it might be a unique sunny day.
Yeah, yeah, something like that. It's the best that we can get in Finland on in March. So relatively happy with the weather today.
Awesome. So, Anthony, you are the founder of Veri, a company addressing the metabolic health crisis, which was recently acquired by Oura Health, the maker of the most trusted smart ring wearable, which has sold more than 2.5 million rings, actually, and makes more than $500 million dollars in annual revenue. But before getting into your story and how you got here, tell us what is metabolic health and why is it important?
100%. I think the simple way of putting metabolic health and understanding it is starting sort of like from the problem of where it stems from, right? So from a physiological perspective, poor metabolic health is a flock of different issues, but mainly like poor metabolic health in the current sphere of medicine is known as pre-diabetes or diabetes or even like cardiovascular related health issues, right? So basically, we're when we speak about metabolic health, we talk about a scale of like where are you on that scale of metabolic health? Good metabolic health being basically that your body is very receptive to insulin, and poor metabolic health being your body not being very receptive to insulin. You basically have then different how what the medical world calls like different conditions on the way, right? You might have heard of like obviously of type 2 diabetes,
Mhm.
but also pre-diabetes is a term that is talked about a lot. There's things like hyperinsulinemia. There are things like PCOS. A lot of these issues stem from this pretty much the same problem. Like the cells in your body are not functioning the way that they should be, and that is mainly driven by lifestyle conditions, obviously genetics as well, like partly, but very much of epigenetics. So things that have basically been accumulated by decisions in your own health, whether you move a lot, whether you, what type of food do you eat, and as well like how stressed you are, because stress causes low level inflammation throughout different, like all of the cells in your body, and that has also a response of your body not being that receptive to insulin, right? So a technical way of explaining the condition, but that's sort of like where we are. The scale of the problem is that in the US, it's considered that around, I think the latest stat actually is that 92% of the adult population is considered metabolically unhealthy based on five sort of like key metrics. So insulin, glucose being one, waist circumference, weight, BMI, and so on, right? So this is something that all of these people in the US, this 92% like have at least like one of those metrics off. And that's what we at Veri and now at Aura are trying to solve for the greater population.
So, when you were younger, you had an accident that led you to study and get into metabolic health.
Yeah.
What was that experience and how this Veri came about?
Yeah, it's a great question, really. So I grew up playing football, and here in Europe, better known as football, in the US, known as soccer, but the real football. Um, Grew up playing football very wholeheartedly my whole life. I got injured when I was around 15, and at that age, I think you're kind of like going through like really sort of like reconstructing your building yourself and trying to figure out of like what do you want to do and be in life. And I think I had basically poised of playing soccer for like the entirety of my life. So that being taken away from me, having to go through that injury, was very sort of like a deep loss, like personally. And I got to appreciate through that loss of being, about 6 or so months out of the fields. I got to really appreciate the fact that how much health actually means to you. I know, through the work that we did with Veri and through all of the customers and the people who we were able to touch and their lives we were able to touch, um, there's like a lot of much more severe health issues. But going through that experience at a very young age, I think it just showed me that how valuable actually health is to you, like how the saying of like health is wealth is actually
Mhm.
true, and the highest currency that you really like have in life. So at the time I was like I got really interested in sort of like improvement of health. I felt that the the health system really like failed me in terms of like addressing, struggles with my mental health, but also like struggles with my metabolic health. So I started like gaining a lot of weight during that period of injury, and I was doing all of the same things pretty much that I was doing before, probably minus the fact that I wasn't moving that much, which is obviously you're consuming a lot of food and you're not moving, so that creates issues. But I was very sort of like lost with the state of my own health, and I was very lost with understanding like the outputs and inputs, and I really felt that the medical system at the time like really failed me. So I started looking for help from people that would be willing to answer like a bit more long-winded and more educational like ways of explaining to me like what was actually going on in my body. And through that experience I got to learn and got to learn and know like most of the current, well-known health influencers in the world of like metabolic health and whatnot. I was the right age of like what 16 at the time. So that was very interesting and educative. And I built my sort of like first business around that when I was 16, 17. Went to university, met my current co-founder, Vern, and through that experience of meeting him and him having like very similar experiences, but on the other side of the Atlantic in the US, where he was raised in Texas, sort of like putting our heads together and really thinking that where could we build something that would have been like very educational and beneficial for us. So that's like how Veri came to be originally in the beginning.
So, how does it really work?
Yeah, so what we really like the big problem that we solved for our customers was we gave them access to these sensors, right? So at the time, now the landscape has changed very much. The 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 CGM providers now understand and see that there is a significant value in selling to other people than just diabetics. But at the time, CGMs weren't like a mass market product. They were something that only diabetics had, and very little people understood the benefit of monitoring glucose like continuously. So the problem that we solved is like we made it available for regular consumers who, for example, were worried about diabetes like running in their family, maybe had like poor like annual physicals of like getting high glucose levels, being identified as like pre-diabetic or whatnot. We gave them access to these sensors, and we built consumer grade software on top of those sensors. um, so that was really like essentially the problem that we solved. And what we did is we provided them access to both of these things. And on a day-to-day basis, like how it would work, we would monitor your glucose through that CGM for 14 days at a time. We would monitor your glucose every 5 minutes. We had a 5 minute like interval break. So that result would be sent through Bluetooth into your mobile phone. And we would then track your lifestyle habits through, for example, our integration at the time with Oura, Apple Health. So most of the wearables, we would see how you're sleeping, what are you doing in terms of exercise, and then inside of Veri, we would basically prompt the users to take an image of their food and log their foods to understand how they're responding to the diet that they're consuming, and what sort of strain is that doing to their metabolic
Mhm.
health, but also showing like what foods are good and bad for you based on those glucose responses, and as well like how processed those foods are, because I think that that's like something that is very or poorly understood, or maybe kind of like framed to people. The main ways like how all of these like nutrition tracking apps work is they are basically relying on like calories in, calories out,
Mhm.
which works. I can't like argue against thermodynamics. Like it definitely works. But the problem is that it's what actually happens in the brain, and how like people can actually like make that a long-term lifelong habit of being on calorie deficit. That is very difficult. So we kind of like approached it from the place of like, let's make sure that people eat as little processed foods as possible. It's almost like impossible for you to gain weight by eating like minimally processed foods, right? So that's sort of like the hypothesis that we had, and like what we built around, and our consumers loved that approach.
Mhm.
And we saw very, very like anecdotally, we saw very strong health outcomes coming from like a lot of our users.
That's a very interesting point because there are a lot of generalizations about diets. Like there's keto,
Yeah.
whether if glucose it's good or bad, processed foods, fasting. But now with these devices, you can track specifically what each body needs. So,
Yeah.
is there any actual generalizable truth about what is good for you and what is bad for you?
I think there's a generalizable truth for sure. There are things that have been shown like in studies of like at like pretty large scale studies of being some of the sort of like the most efficient diets, right? Like I think there's a lot of studies about Mediterranean like diet being sort of like superior like against like everything else when you take like all of the variable like or a lot of the variables into consideration, such as like weight, but also things like how does it impact like your blood fat levels and whatnot, right? Like if you go on carnivore diet, like a lot of people will expect that their lipid panels will basically like go up. and then like all-cause mortality will probably be higher. But this is the thing, like diet is very personal and like depends on like your context as well, like a lot, right? Like if you happen to be like somewhere in like, I don't know, like somewhere in Asia, like eating like a Mediterranean diet just like might be very difficult, and not even difficult, but also like might be very processed, right? So it's very contextual and very difficult to sort of like generalize one diet for everyone. But on a scale, on like a wider population scale, I think Mediterranean diet is like considered like the healthiest diet.
Mhm.
But I like to think that, depending on where you are in the world and depending on, your own personal preferences of like what kind of lifestyle, what food do you like what kind of lifestyle can you keep up? It does make sense to get a more personalized understanding um on how you're basically, how you're exerting like glucose. Like glucose even like only is not enough. You also need to understand deficiencies like in certain like minerals and like micronutrients. You need to understand, like blood, like fat, lipids. So understanding like your lipid panels like every once in a while, like all of those things are really beneficial and valuable when you really want to understand, okay, what works the best for me,
Mhm.
and kind of like course correct, right? So taking all of these things into consideration like really does help, and I think it really does become unique. Um, but I think that the current issue with the like medical 2.0, which I think, people like Peter Attia, who is like very
Yeah.
well known like in the space of longevity, calls like what current way how the current way how the medical institution or the medical world is sort of like constructed as like medical 2.0. It just like doesn't allow for this for a scale, right? Like for people who don't have the means to pay all of these things out of pocket, like it just doesn't allow that, right? So as technology like goes forward, and as we sort of like invest more and more into better ways of doing prevention, and having like new ways of monitoring things, I think we start getting much more closer to encapsulating like a lot of these different aspects of really finding out like, okay, what is the ideal diet for an individual? And CGM is just like one thing that allows to do that. But I think, the space is evolving at a very rapid speed, and everyone wants to sort of like get there as fast as possible.
You were recently acquired by Aura. Speaking of speed, I'm sure that Veri and Aura can definitely accelerate how we get there. Um,
Yeah.
and exiting is one of the main objectives of a founder, but I always think that there is an idealization of what an exit is. How do you reason an exit, and what went through your mind through the process and once the deal was closed?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's it's interesting. And I would probably like, regardless of like what happened at Veri, I would probably like take a step back and actually say that there is a exit doesn't necessarily like doesn't need to be like an objective of a company, right? Like, but it just comes down obviously a lot to like how the company like is constructed, right? Like what is the capital profile of the company, right? But I think that in the future we're going to have like a lot of, very exciting, interesting flavors of companies, of some companies just sort of like bootstrapping, and with AI like being able to build like very, very big companies bootstrapped, and not even like trying to go after an exit, or obviously as well like the sort of like the IPO route, which a lot of companies as well like take, which I think could be argued also is some sort of an exit. But um, going back to sort of like Varian Aura, reasoning for an exit, I think it very much stems from a few aspects, and for me those aspects were: are we able to solve our vision faster with Aura than without Aura? And I think that answer was a clear yes. Like our vision as a company was, we want to end the metabolic health crisis. That's what we kept telling everyone that we hired. That's what we kept telling all of our investors. That's what we kept telling like ourselves when things were really hard, right? ending metabolic health crisis was something that we had like ourselves struggled with, and our families and our loved ones, and we hired against that vision, right? So a lot of the people that actually decided to work for the company came to work for the company because they had had own health problems, or their family or someone they loved had had certain health problems, very often like around metabolic health. So this was kind of like a reasoning like game of number one, which is like, can we get there faster with or without Aura? And I think that the answer there was yes, we can. There is a lot of opportunities that we can do on sort of like advancing like technology and lowering costs, but but also as well like getting access to so many people already who are like under Aura's like customer base. So that was like a very clear to us. And I think then the other one, which I think this probably depends on the founder, but I think that the other one is also like, and it depends a lot on the deal also here, but I think that it's kind of like this mix of like, is that something, or are the cultures really aligned between the two companies? And do I believe that the people who work at Veri will enjoy that transition as well, right? But I think, the bigger portion of that is really like, is there a culture fit? Because if there isn't a culture fit, then it's like very difficult to make a deal like ours when we sort of like put the companies together. And I think, a lot of like mentors of mine sort of like were constantly, who had like exited their companies in the past, were saying like that's really like a very important thing to take into consideration. Like the cultures need to match. They need to not only match but be kind of like feeding off of each other,
Mhm.
like on an ideal place. And I really feel here at Aura like we've succeeded in that. I think there is an aspect of like us being like a smaller company, and us sort of like bringing this energy of like, okay, let's just sort of like go and ship and do things and learn as fast as possible, iterate, um, which is something that I feel that Aura already was relatively good about. But as companies grow in size and scale,
Yeah.
obviously there's always like that where companies get a bit slower. So I think that that has given like a nice injection as well, like here of moving faster.
And how do you do it now? Is your team at Veri going to the Aura offices? Like, have you completely merged, or are you operating as two separate entities?
Yeah, we've the very team goes to the Aura offices and works like very close with the Aura team. So yes, I think you could say that we're fully merged.
What went through your mind when the deal was closed?
I think it was it was a long period of time of like negotiating, and I think there was like a sense of like certain type of relief that the negotiation are over, but also like this sort of like anticipation of like, okay, how does the future look like and what can we build together? So I think, generally speaking, I think there was like a relief and excitement to sort of like to summarize the feeling, I guess. There was also like this bittersweetness in the sense that I think you're always kind of like you're always thinking about um as a founder, when you want to challenge yourself, you're always thinking of like, how far could have we pushed this?
Mhm.
Like, if we wanted to, push it ourselves. But but that kind of like being the interesting like portion to it. But I think, generally speaking, like a lot of excitement, and just overall like um very excited about joining Aura.
So Aura is a smart ring. I actually have it over here.
Nice.
That tracks sleep data and other health data. What is the relationship, or I guess correlation, between your metabolic health, so the very data, with your sleep data?
Yeah, there's a lot like we've obviously like done a lot of sort of like internally we've done a lot of work to sort of like mapping that out. And I think overall there's an interesting relationship between well like sleep but also like activity about stress to glucose, right? So just to give like a few examples, right? Like the reason like the one of the biggest things that happens in the morning where you wake up is you basically have a cortisol spike that wakes you up, right? Like that cortisol spike basically gives your body like an alert of like it's time to wake up. And that cortisol spike sort of like follows your circadian rhythm. So wherever you live, it kind of like follows the sun, right? So that's why you would probably have a hard time. Your circadian rhythm is synced with Finland, and when you fly over to the US, like you'll be waking up like in the middle of the night because that is what your body clock is attuned to, right? So that cortisol spike basically hits in the middle of the evening or in the middle of the night. And and I think, one of the interesting things is you will see that cortisol spike very typically in your glucose levels. So your glucose levels start exerting like without you consuming or eating anything in the morning when you wake up, right? So as an example, if you think about it, like when you're really stressed, like your cortisol levels are high, right? So when you're stressed, you'll see like much more higher glucose levels, like on average, and things like that, right? So, for example, that is like a good example of like how stress and glucose are connected. Also, things like you sleep very poorly, like continuously sleep very poorly. We see like on average like higher glucose levels, like average glucose levels. Also, sort of like higher and steeper glucose variability, which is like how you respond to different foods. So anecdotally, we saw, and I've seen it in my own data, but we as well like saw it in a lot of our customers, where they would have a really poor night's sleep and they would eat an identical meal from the previous day compared to today, and their glucose would spike like multiple
Mm,
tens of points higher,
okay.
right? So things like that, for example, an activity I think is a good example of like what happens in the body is your muscles basically tie a certain amount of glycogen. So this is like a component that is manufactured in the body to from glucose, from ATP glucose production into glycogen that is stored in your liver and muscle mass. So when you move, you use those reserves in your body to produce energy. So if I, for example, eat like a slice of birthday or slice of cake and I move after that or I move before that, my glucose response will be damper, right? So, all of these things like activity, sleep, stress, they have a relationship with glucose. And a lot of the functionality around basically improving your glucose profile then comes from managing like all of these different things, right? Like to basically create an environment where you stress less and where you basically sleep more and when you move more,
Mhm.
right? So, and all of these things obviously have a relationship between each other as well, right? Like if you sleep very well, like you are going to be less stressed and so on.
For
And
sure.
if you are very stressed, you sleep less. So, it's there's like a bi-directional relationship with all of these things, and that's sort of like the beauty of the beauty and the difficulty in the space as well.
Totally. I can imagine. Also, there's so many data that you can track, that you need
Yeah,
to narrow it down to which are the metrics that are actually important.
yeah, exactly.
Which leads me to my next question, because I've been reading a lot about HRV, and I've been told that it's the key daily KPI to follow. What is it in your own words, and is there any approach that we can take to improve the HRV score?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like heart rate variability, HRV, like the abbreviation of heart rate variability, is basically a metric that most of the companies like in this space use. And like what the metric is used for is typically to inform about the level of strain that your body is going through. Like that I would sort of like define it as like what heart rate variability is to me. So, in practice, like basically if you're like as you shared like earlier, like you've been injured,
Yeah.
like if you're injured, um, or if you have like a surgery, you will have basically lower heart rate variability, because likely due to sort of like the level of inflammation that goes on in your body, level of inflammation being inflammation is caused a lot by stress, and heart rate variability being kind of like a stress signal. So I think in modern worlds where we work a lot like indoors, we have like very stressful jobs, and we have a very clear like pandemic or an issue like around burnout and anxiety and like a lot of these like mental health related issues. I do buy the fact that like heart rate variability is a very key metric to be aware of and understand how that develops over time. I, for example, have a very fun little, even like non-terminal or like really like poor health example where during the acquisition process, I had a very low heart HRV um, during that whole period. And I think, like that excitement about joining Aura and like that relief, like getting off my shoulders. I can see it from my data. Like ever since September, my HRV has been like climbing
Stop.
up. And it was like really low before that. And before we started the company, because I was wearing an Aura ring back in like 2018, 2017, um, my HRV was very high. So I think it's informative of like how taxing it is to build a growth company. Also, like a lot of my founder friends have the same
Yeah.
issue as well of like their HRV being like very low and so on. But also like what makes this like more difficult though is that if you are a very active person, so you put a lot of strain on your body. For example, like if you are a like a professional like cyclist or triathlete or something similar, you will see low heart rate variability occasionally when you have like really stressful and strenuous periods of time where you're stressing out your body a lot. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like if you want to be the best in the world, like you just gotta train a lot. Um, so I think there is as well like that nuance to it. But generally speaking, like someone who is like just in an office job, um, managing like HRV, trying to basically, get HRV to optimal levels, which is like very
Mm.
personal, is key, and I think something to optimize for.
And is there like anything we can do? Like, would you say that in order to improve your HRV, you need to like not drink alcohol or not eat carbs before going to bed? Like, is there anything that you could recommend us to do?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of these things, but again, like I don't think like necessarily like anything groundbreaking, just kind of like,
General.
good practices. But I think, like limiting the amount of alcohol is definitely going to have an impact, right? Like I think that's something that we see like across like Aura members of like one of the biggest insights for a lot of people is basically um that HRV does increase, and resting heart rate is like lower over the course of night if they don't consume alcohol in the evenings. Um, and there's been like recently a lot of new insights that as well, like we've seen like what has a positive impact on HRV. Also like pleasure functions like sex, for example, like we just saw that like tagged amongst like a lot of users was was apparently like had a positive impact, and so on. So there's a lot of like interesting stuff that has an impact, but I think the general things are definitely there. Like if you make sure that you sleep that 8 hours, like 8, 9 hours a night, I think that's going to have a huge impact on HRV. Also, like, some sort of movement and like healthy eating. So, pretty general stuff. But yeah.
I love that you mentioned sex because that was one of our questions from the audience to understand how
Yeah.
does sex affect sleep. But I guess sex also affects heart rate variability, which contributes to your overall health.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know, like, is it sort of like, is there, what is the direction there? But it might be because of like improvement in sleep, improvement in heart rate variability. So yeah, no, I think all of these things are super interesting, and I think we're as well like still like all the time learning new things, which I think is great. Like even the company is is big. But we still keep learning a lot of new things from our users and members.
Absolutely. You will never stop learning because I guess like, we
Yeah.
will keep changing constantly. So we will be feeding you
Yeah.
new data. Um,
Hmm.
you joined as the director of partnerships at Aura.
Yeah.
What's your job? Like, what's your role as a director of partnerships?
Yeah, great question. So I look after like all of the sort of like the strategic partnerships at Aura. So what that means is there's a lot of things that, where we are headed to as a company is obviously like we want to excel in like in AI. We really want to break into like deeper into healthcare and like be like a health OS or a member, like a companion of your health, like in your pocket, basically a CEO of your health in your pocket, right? Um, and that requires us to sort of like vertically integrate like much more deeper than just being a consumer product, right? Um, so, I think that is something that we are like heavily focused on. And, the ring itself and all in all, like what we can do, like with current, hardware and services and whatnot, like we don't want to necessarily go out and build all of the things ourselves, but we want to, partner with the best companies in the world to deliver as well, like some of these like additional, services and products to be able to build towards that vision faster.
Hmm.
So I think, summarizing, like that's pretty much my role of like where I try to look after, those strategic partners, like look at like new business opportunities for the company and sort of like expand and scale there.
So for Veri in particular, can Aura users already use the Veri services um, within the app, or how does that really work?
Not yet. So uh, we announced our funding round last a few months ago, and one of the investors in the funding round was one of the biggest CGM manufacturers and providers in the space called Dexcom. So Dexcom took into the funding round, invested 75 million against that 5.2 billion valuation, and uh, we are looking to launch an integration between Stelo, so Dexcom's like non-diabetic sensors, and Aura on the first half of 2025. So that is like something that I'm very closely working on, for example.
Okay, super. So Aura's business model, it's quite unique because it sells the hardware piece and also sells the subscription model. Again, in the example of Veri, where does Veri come in? Like, will it be included, or is it like an additional service that you will sell?
Yeah, we're quite not yet like sure of how that is going to take place. But I think that the the big sort of like point in the like the software as well, like is to basically help us build and grow like all of the different things that we can offer to our members, like around that software piece, right? So really incentivize us as a company to like build a lot of value like around delivering better and better products, and I think almost care to our members, right? So it's still like TBD how that is going to look like, but yeah.
Okay, super. Then we'll see. We'll see. We don't need to have
Yeah,
an answer
very
right
soon.
now.
Very soon.
Super. Getting into more like the social aspect of business, you've always merged market-based mechanisms with the health solutions that you've marketed, which is quite the opposite of the scene theory that you and I had been discussing. Um, I guess, yeah, tell us briefly about that theory first.
Yeah, like I think there's interesting, like we as at Veri, like I was obviously like in the space of like health tech and wellness, but also at the space of like consumers. And when I was looking around like very successful consumer companies in the world, like I always sort of like had this sensation or feeling that like the most successful ones are very much built around, what is considered like seven deadly sins, right? Um, like sloth or greed or sort of like jealousy or you know uh so on, right? Not to mention like any companies, but you can probably think about like what are the most, what are the, let's maybe play with the number seven, the seven most useful, the seven most used apps and services that you use personally. When I think about like those companies, I'm like, oh wow, like all of these companies are basically making me behave against sort of like those virtues that I could be behaving towards. Well, minus I think Aura and Veri, right? But I think that's like overall the theory. And that was always like interesting because I was trying to then like think about, okay, how do you sort of like go deeper and apply it still, like even you're building a company in a space which is, at the end of the day, trying to do something that is considered like a virtue, of improving people's health, for example, improving people's health by providing a ring to people. I think what Aura has really like nailed, in my opinion, is like it has kind of like done both of those things in a way, right? Like Aura is a very passive wearable. It's basically, it doesn't require you a lot of energy, but it does provide you a lot of information back. It's a very passive tool in the background, what we call like internally like calm tech. It's very calm. The way how Aura, the users of Aura use the product, it very background informative, is always there when you need it, but you don't really need to do a lot to get a lot of
Yeah.
out, right? So that I think that sort of like re-encourages the loop of convenience and of like being lazy to get energy or to get basically value. Um, and so on, right? So I think that's really like the mindset where founders should go and think about as well, like a lot of these businesses, for example, in the space of like health tech and sustainability and whatnot, of like how do I build products that really are, convenience first and telling people not to consume like that much energy in getting like the value and the information back.
Yeah. And since you and I talked about it, I've been thinking a lot on this topic. And I also have a theory, which is that changing consumer behaviors, it's super hard. Very, very
Yeah.
hard. So the goal should be to try to use the sins already within our societies to market good and social products or services. Like, for example, Aura, like what you just described, it's one example, but also like circularity, like the circular economy.
Yep.
The fashion industry, it's a huge pollutant, it uses a lot of water. So if we manage to translate the consumerism into second-hand stuff, then hopefully,
Yeah.
if the first-hand production decreases, then we've sort of like cracked the code of these scenes.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I think in the even in the sort of like the circular economy, like secondhand market, like everything, what I see, like when I see, sort of like I think that the first evolution of these companies, like a lot of them were basically, the consumer would take the picture and, those pictures will also like look like kind of like unattractive. Um, and that would probably have like an impact on as well, like, the price that they can sell and whatnot. Like Vestiaire, like then like did a pretty like different approach where I think that they are now pretty much like on the headshots as well, like listing out as it was like a new product and then like adding like some additional pictures, right? So it just like creates this lust almost like towards like whatever you're looking
Yeah.
for, um which then like is really sort of like you're working in the circular economy, but you're masking the company into like this consumerism and some of these sort of like maybe some of these sins, give it or take it, right? So yeah, I think that's right, of like trying to think about it like true that. Also, like I've heard a few companies in the circular economy space who are basically pulling information, apparently like pulling information from your email of like all of the online shopping that you've done. So when you actually list the product for sale, like it pulls everything from your email and says that is it this, or this product that you're looking to sell? And then you can tag them as in like, yes, it's this, yes, it's that, yes, it's that,
Okay.
and they will then fetch the images from online, to list out. So it doesn't require you to do,
Even less.
all of that. even less, right? Like it requires you less and less of doing work in order to sell
Hmm.
stuff, right? So I think that's as well like a lot of the thinking that needs to go through some of these companies, because a lot of companies, I think that they go out and build, or founders go out and build these products on in these spaces of, for example, health, and they just think that because it's healthy, people will want it. It's actually like quite the opposite. Uh, it's like if you look at like the most ordered food on DoorDash and whatnot, like it is unhealthy foods,
Yeah,
unfortunately. It's not the healthy options, right? So you 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 need to really like think about it like from that aspect of as well of like, okay, kind of like people don't necessarily want to be healthy, unfortunately. They do, but at the same time they don't, right? So I think it's a marketing question as well.
yeah. What a huge contradiction. I think that's the big,
Dude, it's a difficult topic.
very difficult.
It's still like a theory that I'm brewing, but I think there's something to that of like just trying to think about like the businesses that you build, always sort of like having people consume less energy, on the sort of like topical level, like focusing on, that like what are the sin hooks, and then like building that virtue on the sort of like the bottom of the actual like value proposition.
Absolutely. Anthony, I have one
Yeah.
last question for you, and then I will let you go, unfortunately for me.
Yeah.
I love to pick up the brains of the experts of different industries. So I would love to imagine that you're looking into a crystal ball that shows you the future.
Mm.
So the question is, where is the industry of health tech with the impact of AI going in the next 5 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think this is as well like it's interesting because this is it's a market question of like, what happens in the US when it comes to the health tech is very different what is happening like in
Yeah,
Europe. Um, I think, Europe feels very much that a lot of the space is basically becoming like it's basically becoming more private. Like the healthcare is sort of like moving from public providers, especially here, like talking about the Finnish context, like from public providers to the private providers, because the quality of the public services are just like decreasing so much. So I think, that is happening, which is obviously has happened for a long time ago in the US, where pretty much everything is now private. Um, and uh and that is then like causing like a lot of different incentives, and how incentives are being built, and like the cost of healthcare, and like all of the sort of like the issues, and I think fears like that we should also like
be aware of.
be aware of and like have. um but I think like overall, like if I sort of like look from a higher level, like I think what is happening very much is the the consumer is becoming like the CEO of their own health, right? Like I think like what we've seen historically is you as the consumer or the patient in that, patient journey of you identifying something to you then like fixing that, you've been like a passenger or almost like a spectator of basically seeing how things unfold. And those, the doctors or even like the system itself, like being at the center and deciding like what gets done and what doesn't get done, right? And I think, with all of the tools that we have right now coming out, it's becoming sort of like this world where you are in the center of the attention. You are the CEO of your own health. Like you have the tools that you need, and you then are requesting like what services you want from the health care industry. Um, and they are then basically helping you with that care, and you are sort of like building that path yourself, right? So I think this is kind of like what is happening. Then, and I believe, and I see this all the time. There's a lot of companies coming out right now, like things like, you can basically in the US, like You can book a time from Function or from like one of these like blood biomarker companies. You can test everything in your body pretty much. You can, as well, like in Sweden and in London, you can do like a Neco Health thing, right? So you just like go into like a DEXA MRI scan. You get all of your blood
Mm.
biomarkers. You have them in an app, right? So you are then owning like a lot of that information, and based on that information you're making like care decisions for yourself. So obviously the healthcare industry right now, like if you have those results and you go to a public doctor, like they're not going to care about those things necessarily. So I think there's going to be a lot of players that are going to then be saying, we care. Just integrate like all of your data with us and we'll keep you on tabs of whatever you need to know and like guide you to the right place, right? And I think insurance is as well like going to sort of like be built as well like on top of this of like saying, okay, instead of the insurance being also like sort of like treatment based, which, it will be for a long time. I think there's going to be players as well who influence you into keeping yourself healthy, preventing different things happening, subsidizing some of the cost that like a lot of these like care providers and then these testing companies are offering,
Hmm.
with then like a foundation of like your health data needs to live somewhere. And I think, we at Aura, we want to be that something where your health data lives and integrate between like all of these different parties to enable the consumer to be the CEO. And obviously AI is going to have a huge role in facilitating like um, all of that information, like basically translating that hard to understand with a medical degree information to the
What you actually
consumer,
have.
making them speak the lingo to the care providers, and them having all of that information as well, like of linking that back and then providing them the care that they need, right? So I think there's going to be this big movement of a lot of companies, platform companies, raising to a place where they want to be the health OS, but also, and then a lot of these companies forming around who are going to be sort of like the fresh new take on healthcare, whether that was insurance or providers.
Thank you, Anthony. I think it's a great note to finish the conversation. Also, because it seems like the industry it's not only focusing on prevention data, but also on treatment. Like this CEO
Yeah.
role, it's to empower consumers to take action based off of their health metrics. So I feel like we'll definitely see a change, hopefully, in all these like metabolic health crisis, for example, or other health crises that we're seeing, thanks to all the data that you're tracking, and also, I think AI helping
Yeah.
understand that data. So thank you so much, and I wish you all the best in your new adventure at Aura.
Thank you. Likewise. And I really love the podcast, and I really love the topic. I think it's a very important topic, and I really believe, sort of like why should companies build in the space of sort of like, impact entrepreneurship, or however you want to sort of like say it, or, reinventing capitalism of, not like those same necessarily like greedy values that we know, like the typical bread and butter capitalism being. Um, I think it's very important as well, like from the standpoint of, like as an entrepreneur, as a striving entrepreneur, even as an employee of like going into like a startup, I think it's very important to understand that it's going to be very difficult, right? Like it's going to be very, very difficult. And when you're really like pushed to the edge of, am I going to continue or not? What really, really makes a difference in that decision is that you really feel that you're doing something for like a net benefit or positive to the world. Like if you don't have that, it's going to be, and if you really don't care about the problem that you're solving like very deeply, which I think typically sort of like stems from like personal like
I
values
agree.
towards being a good human and being like a good sort of like participant to this society of humanity, or like humanity, it helps a lot, right? So examples of companies and entrepreneurs who are basically building for this, I think, the younger generation needs those. So I really appreciate you for taking your time to spread this information.
Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate it a lot. Have a great day.
Thank you, Claudia.